One name that keeps surfacing in those conversations is a veteran quarterback who could be on the move before the league's trade deadline hits. Welcome back to Lions News Fan Report, your number one source for everything Detroit Lions, where you get the most exclusive updates, breaking news, and insider analysis on our beloved team. I'm bringing you information today that's circulating through league circles, involving a quarterback situation that's more complicated than it appears on the surface, and a potential move that could reshape the playoff picture for multiple teams. What I'm about to break down involves a 37-year-old signal caller, a struggling team that invested heavily in him, and the question of whether desperation could lead to one of the most surprising trades of the season. Stay locked in, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this matters to the Lions and how it could impact our path to the playoffs. Let me set the stage for you by talking about where we are in the NFL calendar right now. The 2025 trade deadline is rapidly approaching, scheduled for Tuesday, November 4th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, which means teams across the league are in evaluation mode. Front offices are assessing their rosters, determining whether they're buyers or sellers, and having difficult conversations about which players might be available and which players they might target. This is the time of year when championship contenders make aggressive moves to shore up weaknesses. And it's also when struggling teams decide to cut their losses and start planning for the future. The trade market is always fascinating because it's driven by desperation as much as opportunity. Teams that are winning want to add pieces that can help them in January and February, while teams that are losing want to accumulate draft capital and get out from under expensive contracts that aren't producing results. The sweet spot for trades happens when those two motivations align. When a contender has a specific need and a struggling team has a player who fills that need but no longer fits their timeline, that's when deals get done. And that's exactly the kind of situation we're seeing develop right now with a particular quarterback. Now, before I reveal the specific player we're talking about, I want you to understand the broader context of the quarterback market heading into this trade deadline. There aren't many quality quarterbacks available, which makes sense because teams protect their franchise players at all costs. But there are a few veteran signal callers whose situations have changed, whose teams are underperforming, and who might be available if the price is right and the circumstances align. These aren't young quarterbacks with upside. These are established veterans who've been around the league, who have track records we can evaluate, and who come with both strengths and significant weaknesses. The player I'm focusing on today is someone who would only become a realistic trade candidate under very specific circumstances. We're talking about a scenario where multiple teams suffer quarterback injuries, where desperation forces a franchise to make a move they wouldn't otherwise consider, and where the financial complications of the deal can somehow be worked out. This isn't a player who's going to generate a bidding war. This isn't someone who's going to command multiple draft picks. But he is someone who could theoretically help a team that finds itself in a bind with no other options available. Let me talk about what this quarterback brings to the table from a pure football perspective, because understanding his skill set is crucial to understanding why he might or might not be a viable trade candidate. At this stage of his career, we're looking at a player who's best suited as a backup or emergency starter rather than a long-term solution. He's someone who needs a specific system to succeed, particularly one that emphasizes play-action passing and allows him to throw with rhythm on defined concepts. When you put him in that kind of offense, he can be effective. His career play-action quarterback rating is 73.6, which shows he can still execute when the scheme plays to his strengths. But here's where the complications start to pile up, and this is why the trade market for this player is extremely limited. He's 37 years old, which means he's at the tail end of his career with limited upside and significant injury risk. Last season, he struggled mightily with interceptions, throwing 16 of them, which shows his decision-making has declined, and he's no longer able to protect the football consistently. Those are major red flags for any team considering acquiring him, because you're not just getting a veteran presence, you're getting a player whose physical tools have diminished and whose performance has regressed. The financial aspect of any potential trade is even more problematic than the on-field concerns. This quarterback has a $10 million guarantee in 2026, which is a significant hurdle for any team thinking about acquiring him. That's not just money you're paying for this season. That's a commitment that extends into next year. and it limits your flexibility in terms of roster construction and salary cap management. For a contending team that's trying to maximize every dollar, taking on that kind of contract for a backup quarterback doesn't make a lot of sense. Unless you're truly desperate. So who are we talking about? The veteran quarterback whose name keeps coming up in trade deadline conversations, the player whose situation in Atlanta has become increasingly complicated, is Kirk Cousins. The Falcons invested heavily in Cousins before this season, believing he could be the missing piece that would elevate their offense and make them legitimate contenders in the NFC. That investment hasn't paid off the way they hoped, and now there's speculation about whether Atlanta might be willing to move on from him if the right opportunity presented itself. Here's why this matters to us as Lions fans, and why I wanted to bring this to your attention even though the likelihood of Cousins actually being traded is relatively low. The NFC playoff picture is incredibly competitive right now, and any move that affects one of our potential competitors is something we need to be aware of. If the Falcons were to trade Cousins, it would be a clear signal that they're punting on this season and starting to think about 2026 and beyond. That would be one less team we have to worry about in the playoff race, one less competitor for wild card spots, and potentially an easier path for the Lions to secure home field advantage throughout the playoffs. There's also been some interesting speculation about potential landing spots for Cousins if he were to be traded, and the most frequently mentioned destination is actually Minnesota, where he spent the majority of his career before signing with Atlanta. The Vikings have been dealing with quarterback struggles, particularly with Carson Wentz looking shaky in Week 7, and even though J.J. McCarthy is expected to return from an ankle injury soon, there's been talk about whether Minnesota might consider bringing Cousins back as insurance. That reunion would be convenient from a narrative standpoint, and Cousins obviously knows that system inside and out. But the financial complications make it unlikely to happen. From the Lions' perspective, the Cousins situation is interesting, but not something we need to be actively involved in. We've got Jared Goff playing at an MVP caliber level. We've got one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL, and we've got depth at the quarterback position with our backup who knows our system. There's absolutely no reason for Detroit to have any interest in acquiring Cousins, and I'm confident our front office isn't making calls about him. But we should be paying attention to where he ends up, if he ends up anywhere at all, because it could impact the competitive balance in the NFC. The broader point here is that the trade deadline is a critical moment in the NFL season, and smart teams use it to their advantage. The Lions are in a position where we should be buyers rather than sellers, where we should be looking to add pieces that can help us make a deep playoff run rather than thinking about the future. We've got a championship caliber roster. We've got a coaching staff that's proven they can compete with anyone, and we've got a window that's wide open. If there are moves to be made that can make us better, I trust our front office to identify those opportunities and pull the trigger. The Kirk Cousins situation is a reminder that not every big name that becomes available is worth pursuing. Sometimes the smart move is to stand pat, to trust the roster you've built, and to avoid taking on problematic contracts or declining veterans just because they have name recognition. The Lions have been smart about roster construction under Brad Holmes, and I expect that same level of discipline to continue through the trade deadline. We're not going to make moves just to make moves. We're going to be strategic and intentional about any additions we make. So Lions faithful, I want to hear your thoughts on this situation. Do you think Kirk Cousins will actually get traded before the deadline? Would you have any interest in the Lions acquiring him as a backup? How do you think his potential trade, or lack thereof, impacts the NFC playoff rate? What moves do you want to see the Lions make before the deadline? Drop all your comments below, because I genuinely want to know what you're thinking about this. This is the kind of comprehensive analysis and insider perspective you get here at Lions News Fan Report. We don't just report the headlines, we break down what they mean for our team and our championship aspirations. If you're not subscribed, smash that button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The trade deadline is approaching fast, and we're going to be covering every move that impacts the Lions and the NFC playoff picture. Hit that like button if you found this breakdown valuable. Share this video with every Lions fan you know, and let's keep this conversation going in the comments. We're in the middle of a special season, and every decision matters as we push toward the playoffs. One pride, and I'll see you in the next video.